Hello, my name is Mike, and I am a parent of a dyslexia child.
My first question is, what were the first signs that you noticed that your child was having learning challenges? How old were they?
It was my son, Andrew, and he was, I believe, in first grade. So he'd be 6. And we noticed, well, my wife noticed first because my wife would go in and help out in the classroom, and my son would like try to monopolize her time because he didn't understand the instructions because he couldn't read anything. And then we were giving flashcards. And so I was going through the flashcards with him. And so I put a word like that, THAT, he couldn't sound it out. So I tell him like 3 or 4 times, what the word was, that. And then I'd put the card like 2 or 3 cards back and it would pop up again. And it's like he'd never seen it before. So that's when I said to my wife, I think there's something, going on here.
Okay. And how was your child diagnosed with dyslexia?
I can't remember if a friend or a teacher or somebody, but somebody recommended to us to go see a psychologist, I think it is, and a certain psychologist that sort of specialized in that thing. And so we took Andrew there, and she did her test and basically said, yes, he's a classic dyslexic.
And what age did he get tested? Was that in first grade as well?
Yes, it was 6th grade. Yeah.
Okay, 6th grade?
Sorry, 6 years old.
Oh, okay.
First grade, yes.
And did you know anything about dyslexia before you found out your child was dyslexic?
No, just the sort of things you'd heard, it's people put the B and they do the D backwards and stuff like that. So we had no idea. When Andrew was having the problems, we had no idea. We didn't think, that might be dyslexic, because we had no idea that was one of the signs of dyslexic. And then when the psychologist told us, oh yeah, he's dyslexic, we didn't know, what exactly does that mean? But really, we figured it out by buying some books on, what it meant to be dyslexic and what it is about the wiring of your brain.
So you kind of just answered this a little bit.
Yeah.
But can you tell me your initial thoughts and feelings when you realized you had a dyslexic child?
Like most parents, your initial thought, so my wife cried, on the day of, you're sort of like, well, now what do you do, right? Because we had this and we went back to the school. School boards have processes in place to make accommodations, but they're very, very long and they require a lot of work. One member of the public school system, I forget what she was doing, basically said to us, our job isn't to, if your son is an A student, our job isn't to make sure he's an A student. Our job is just to get him to this next grade.
Right.
So sort of meet the minimum requirement. That was the thing that kind of, again, made us nervous. And that's when so we weren't getting any solutions from the public school. We went to the psychologist, she didn't have any really good ideas. It was actually my wife, again, and I just sort of doing research saying, well, we got to find a private school. And by the way, it's not just any private school. There are certain private schools.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. So it was a long, hard process. We're like, well, there you go. And now it's up to you to figure it out about whether your son is there something that he can do in public school, or is there other schools around, or what do you have to do? Yeah.
Right. Yep. I've been in a similar situation.
Yeah.
So my next question is, how did you go about talking to your child about their dyslexia at first?
Well, so he was 6, right? So he knew something was wrong because all the other kids in his class were, things were happening and everybody else in his class seemed to be able to get it and he didn't. And Andrew actually tested like high IQ, right? So he knew something was up. And that's why when he came in, when my wife came into the class, like he sort of latched onto her because, something was wrong, but he didn't know what it was. I think when you're 6 or 7, it's probably a bit easier because they just they ultimately trust you, right? So we just said to him, he was just going to school. We were saying to him, just try to do the best you can, even though he was very frustrated. And then when we said to him, well, we think we got to send you to this private school. I mean, he was fine with it, right? He's okay, that's what it takes. That's what it takes. So he wasn't, my recollection is he knew something was up and that he was different, but it wasn't maybe as big as a thing as it would have been if you're in the 5th and 6th grade and you had a whole lot of friends and now you're going off somewhere. he was only in first grade. Again, I think at that time you have ultimate trust in your parents, right?
Right.
So
Yeah.
yeah.
My next question is, how did you learn to support your child? And what are some ways you support your child's learning differences today?
Well, so the first thing that happens also too is when you send your child to one of these schools, a lot of good things happen right off the bat, even when he's in grade 2. So the first thing he realizes now is, oh, there's a whole bunch of people just like me. And because they're like him, they can help each other get through the process, because it's not like when he was back at the public school, some guys already like, way ahead of him reading and wondering what's the matter with Andrew. So some of the help came from just the change in environment. But what we did is we just kept on telling him what we had read, that there's nothing wrong with you, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's just that your brain is wired a different way. And just like some people are wired to be creative, and some people are wired this way, and some people are wired this way, you are wired that, decoding how symbols turn into words is a little more difficult for you than it is for other people, and
Mm-hmm.
and everybody's different, and that just happens to be your difference. And it has a big impact in school, but you have other strengths, right?
Right.
And
Right.
again, when I can't speak to relatively speaking, but again, when you're second grade and third grade, I think you accept it a lot faster, again, because you trust your parents.
Right. Right.
And he was in the school, thankfully, and I think most schools, but he was in the school. Like this school he went to, there was 5 kids in his class and 2
Oh,
teachers.
wow.
Yeah, and I think there was like maybe 20 or 30 kids in the whole school. So like he got a lot of attention, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so he was in a very warm environment. So initially, he didn't need as much support. Matter of fact, he needed more emotional support when it got to high school. Because then in high school, because he switched from private schools to high schools, and they weren't willing to give him accommodations. So we had to kind of go in there, and he knew he was, the differences now were more apparent, because he was with the general population. And so there was more, the issue there was he was spending so much time on homework that he couldn't participate in the extracurricular activities that his friends were, because, where they had a half-hour homework, the same amount of work took him 2 or 3 hours, right? So
Right.
there was, when you get, and I don't know how old you are, but, children go through phases, right? So in high school, being with your friends and stuff is a big deal. So that was very frustrating for him. So that took a lot of encouragement. And then that kind of wore off at university, right? So university, he was fine. And by then he had learned how to cope. He had learned how to make accommodate, and he learned how to advocate for himself. So high school was actually, in the first couple of years of high school, were actually more difficult. And it wasn't really painful, but more difficult than any other year. He just noticed that, he could not participate in all the things that his friends were participating in. And he knew, he was realizing that he had to work a lot harder to try to stay even with everybody.
Yeah, because especially in high school, your schedule's so packed, and there's more of a workload too. So I definitely see what you're saying.
Yeah, and in elementary school, teachers are spending a lot of time with you, and even middle school. In high school, you're getting closer to university where, well, here's your assignment and you need to figure out how to get it done. There's more need for independence and for strategizing and allocating your time. That took a little while because, again, his friends were, there's something due in 2 or 3 days, and his friends were knocking it off in a day, and he was he was working all hours, to try to get it done in the time that was given to him. Yeah.
What would you say was their most encouraging part of dyslexia, and less and difficult part of dyslexia for you guys?
I think the most encouraging part was that I think you sort of join a family, right? So now when you went to this school of people, the kids with dyslexic, you're sort of with this family, and everybody's very encouraging, right? So almost like joining a team. Encouraging point of view, there was a lot of encouragement, a lot of support for him and his friends, because they were, they always say dyslexic people, he does have some special talents, like he's very artistic and stuff like that. So he also spent a lot of time doing that, and that was his therapy. I also found that I think nowadays people are a lot more okay with people having disabilities, right? So as soon as my son was dyslexic, one of the things I found out, so I worked at a company, I was in the IT department, and I started telling people I had dyslexia. all of a sudden, all these people started telling me, well, I'm dyslexic. Well, I'm dyslexic.
Mm,
Then I started finding out, oh, my older sister's dyslexic. Nobody ever told me my older sister's dyslexic. So you find out that there's all these people that are dyslexic, and they've just done fine, and but they really haven't said a lot about it. As Andrew started, so as Andrew works and stuff like that, and his spelling is still not the greatest and all that sort of stuff. I think people, when he says people, well, I'm dyslexic, so my spelling's not going to be all that great. Everybody goes, oh, okay. Back in my age, you would have been, the teacher would have slapped your wrist, and you would be called stupid. They would have been less forgiving. That's the word I'm looking for. Less forgiving than they are now. So I think the discouraging part to him is, again, he's still doing, his work. He still has to do reports, and so it still takes him a longer
longer
time
time,
to get the work done than it
Mhm.
would take, like, up here at the same job. Because so that means that even in his later life, though he's gone through and being able to do stuff, he still probably makes more mistakes. His dyslexia shows up more in his work and stuff than it might be for somebody who was mildly dyslexic. So that's the,
Right.
I don't think it really bothers him that much because he's used to it, but that is, he realizes that.
So what is one thing that you wish someone else told you about dyslexia?
So as soon as Andrew got older, but even as soon as I retired, the first thing I did, one of the first things I did was I started joining boards, and I joined the board of the International Dyslexia Association.
Mhm.
And the one thing I wanted to do was to get through all the myths and all the misinformation and lack of information that parents had.
Right.
And so I think that's the one thing. I'm so immersed in it now that I'm hoping that there's more information now than there was before. I do know that there are states like Georgia who are now testing all the kids at a certain grade for dyslexia,
Mhm.
and that's happening a lot, and that's part of the IDA. So what I would have liked is when the psychologist said, "Oh, your son's dyslexic," there was this, "Oh, and here's your next step."
Mhm.
Right, here's the things you can do, and here's the resources you need, and there's a spectrum of dyslexia and blah blah blah, as opposed to your son's dyslexia and sort of like, good luck.
Right, yeah.
There's still a lot of work to do because
So my last question for you would be, do you have any tips for any parents who are just now finding out that their kid might be dyslexic?
yes, so don't go to the internet. I forget the name. There's this book, and I should know it, but there's some really good books about what does it mean to be dyslexic. Read books from recognized professionals as opposed to rumors and stuff like that. I read this book, and I think it's same for my wife and I, and it was just like, well, his mind is wired a different way, and there's way to rewire his mind. So my advice is, you need to read professional stuff and get an idea about what it really means, and then you somehow, and I don't know if that even exists, but somehow you also got to get some sort of idea of on the spectrum where your child is, because
Mhm.
if your son is daughter is really badly dyslexic, really, if
Right,
you're
yeah.
severely dyslexic, you're going to have to need some holistic. You have to go to some school or place that is basically for dyslexic kids, right?
Mhm.
If your child is mildly dyslexic, you probably need a tutor, or that'd be best case. Worst case, you can go to a private school where at least he or she will be in a class of 10 kids and gets 15 kids, and get some more hands-on teaching than he will in a public school where it's sort of like, you know they
Everyone for
do the
themselves.
yeah, they do the best they can, but the
Yeah.
resources are smaller. So, but educate yourself, but because that's the first, we went to the internet, and the internet was, the internet is, oh my God, the world's going to come to an end, and yada,
Yeah.
yada. So yeah, yeah,
Yeah. I
yeah,
see what you're saying. That is all the questions I have prepared today.
yeah. Okay,
Um,
okay,
if you
good.
have anything else you think might be helpful for teachers, parents, and students, feel free to add it.
A lot of, a lot of people would bring in their sons and daughters who are now like 15 or 16, and they're in high school, and they'd all tell us, everything's going to be fine. When you first get diagnosed, you don't believe it. You think, oh, that's not going to happen to my son. But there is a lot of resources. Unfortunately, it may mean spending a bit of money, which is
Mhm.
the difficult part. But I think there's a lot of there is resources. And again, I think people are much more understanding of it. It's not a fake thing. It's a real thing. And I think with all disabilities nowadays, people are a lot more understanding about that and willing to give accommodations than they were. But you have to advocate.
Right.
You
Yeah.
have to advocate, sometimes hard, but that's going to be the upside. But yeah, you just got to keep asking and pushing. Yeah.